Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael and we're going to be getting right back into some more Reddit stories. If you enjoy the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's begin. This story was posted by a user named Kamarth in the legal advice subreddit. The post is titled, "My grandmother gave my brother and me an equal share portfolio each when we were kids. My brother sold his when they were worth a car. I left mine in and now they're a substantial amount. Brother and his GF want my half now. When my brother was 16 and I was 4, my grandmother set aside a share portfolio for us. As soon as we were old enough, it was transferred into our own accounts. It was only 4 years later that my brother dipped heavily into his and bought a new Honda. I knew about my portfolio for much longer than he did before it became mine, and I watched it grow since I understood what it was. By the time I was given full control, it was already worth a ridiculous amount because a large portion of it was invested in Apple. I'm torn about using the funds as Dad drilled it into me to leave them to grow until I'm in my 40s. I don't talk much with my brother, he's done some foolish things to the family over the years, and I didn't really grow up with him, so all I usually hear about his life comes through Dad. His new girlfriend works in law though, and I've received a formal letter from them both stating that the investments my grandmother made were designed for both of us to use, not just for me alone. His portfolio was only around $15,000. The number is correct, but mine was only worth that at the time he spent it too. They want half of the value of mine now, and his girlfriend has informed me that if I don't give them access, then the legal fees and fines would eat up my half, leaving me with nothing. The dividends alone support a significant part of my life and have saved me several times. If half of that disappeared, it would set me back years. I know it sounds selfish, but I'm really used to having the extra income back me up when I've wanted to move. I've lived in 4 states by my own choice, and I want to continue exploring before I settle down, if I ever do. How likely is it that they'll win and leave me with nothing? As far as I know, there was no paperwork or will, just my grandmother's word. She set up my brother's accounts when he turned 19, but she gave them to Dad at the same time as my brother got his, and Dad transferred the whole lot to me 6 years ago. For my share, I have all the logins. The trading accounts and bank accounts are in my name, and the shares are all solely in my name too. Should I find my own lawyer? If I need one, what kind do I need? I have an accountant I've used for years, but this seems more like a legal issue than an accounting one. User Gavin Mack said, "I think the older brother and his meddling girlfriend will find it impossible to get any decent lawyer to take the case on a contingency fee basis. That means they would have to pay tens of thousands out of pocket in attorney's fees to pursue this, money which they probably don't have. I believe they're bluffing and their case has no merit. There's a reason the letter didn't come from an actual lawyer, it came from a girlfriend who works in law. By the way, who authored and signed the letter? You might be able to make a very plausible complaint to the State Bar of California that the girlfriend is practicing law without a license if she is involved in this. And though she may not be prosecuted for that crime, it could jeopardize her chances of passing the character and fitness requirements to be admitted to the bar down the road if she ever wants to become a lawyer." User Malevolent said, "It sounds like it could be a vexatious claim to fleece you of your money. When you speak to a lawyer, ask them about whether the conduct of your brother's girlfriend is in breach of any ethical obligations. If so, I would include reference to this in any response letter. The prospect of losing one's practicing license for a breach of ethical obligations should terrify most lawyers." Edit, your phrasing "works in the law" makes it unclear if she is a lawyer. If not, then the letter has no substantive impact other than to threaten you. Other people have suggested responding by saying you will seek costs if you successfully defend any claim against you. User Galactica said, "I've seen this type of thing dozens of times, both working in law and in personal life. They don't have a prayer. Hire an estate attorney. They specialize in this kind of thing. They will first send a cease and desist letter. If that doesn't work and your brother keeps at it, they'll tell them they'll see them in court. Their first problem will be getting a lawyer to take their case. Except for the ambulance chasers, based on what you've told us, none would take it. They need to have something to show they actually have a claim to the money. Even a handwritten note signed by your grandmother might get them a lawyer, but it wouldn't do much for them in court." The girlfriend's attempt at intimidation. It sounds like she's not an attorney, so if she sent you the letter on her law firm's letterhead, she's in trouble with both the court and her employer, if she's a paralegal. In California, paralegals are regulated and have certification. If this is the case, she will lose whatever certifications she may have. If she's the receptionist or a file clerk, she's out of a job. Bottom line, get an attorney. It may cost you a few grand, but in the end, it will be worth every penny. I really can't stress this enough. The courtroom is no place for amateurs. These two are low rent. They are desperate for money, hatched a plan, and thought they could scare you into handing over your money. The problem is, she clearly doesn't know how the law and courts work, and they didn't have any plan for if their bluff didn't work. Also, going to court will cost them. If this managed to go to court, they have to pay the attorney, and that means a retainer up front. When they lose, they'll be on the hook for the balance of his fee, money they don't have. If they try to do it themselves, they have to pay filing fees, which can get expensive. Get a lawyer. They will crush them. A few weeks later, OP gave us an update, mostly good news. I worked with my dad and got my own lawyer. I got the timeline of my shares wrong, but it comes out the same. What my brother and I inherited from my grandmother was originally part of my grandfather's portfolio. He was the money-savvy one. My grandmother looked after those after he died, and she personally set up my brother's accounts and gave him control of his part. She didn't do the same with mine before she died. Instead, the shares were in her will, and she left everything she owned to my dad with instructions that what was $15,000 worth when my brother got his equivalent part would go to me when I was old enough to know how to take care of them. There was no trust, she just trusted my dad. My dad did the right thing and set up accounts for me, giving me control 6 years ago. My dad put some of his own shares in too as an extra leg up. Dad admitted to me he'd chewed out my brother last year when he came to him asking for money. Dad had supported him several times over the years and got to the point he'd had enough. My brother found out I still had my investments because Dad had used me as an example of how brother should have been using money. That's how my brother found out I still had shares and they'd grown. According to all that info, my lawyer tells me I'm in the clear, but it's not going to get to the point of finding that out in court, as my brother's girlfriend was only a legal secretary. I say was because the firm she worked for apologized and informed my lawyer she was terminated immediately. The letter I received from them had been edited to put her name in a position higher up than it should have been, and some of the contact information had been changed. A week after she was fired, my brother visited me begging for money. His girlfriend is in serious debt, and she took a chance on scamming cash from me and lost. I felt awful rejecting my own brother over and over, and if he hadn't involved his girlfriend needing an amount well into 5 figures, I might have given him some. The next morning, I found all my tires had been slashed. Screw him. I don't feel bad anymore. The rest of the comments in the previous thread made me realize I don't know nearly enough about what I'm doing with the shares, dividends, and money in general. A lot of the decisions I've made have been with Dad's help, and his advice has paid off well so far, but not because I knew it would, but because I had no idea what I was doing and left it up to him. I've booked in to work with a financial advisor to make the most of what I have. Thanks for all your comments. This next post was made in the AMI Overreacting subreddit by a user named Accomplished Stop. The post is titled, "Wife Contacted Her Ex. I intend to ask for divorce." Throwaway, because for all of the reasons this is likely to be entertaining, I don't want this knowledge to be public. I recently married my longtime girlfriend of 8 years, who I'll call Amy. Important context. While we have been together that whole time, the first 5 years were not exclusive. We did not live together, and for 2 years were 1,200 miles apart, though we made regular visits. When she and I first met, we were both married but in open relationships. My wife, myself, and Amy's husband were required to travel for extremely long periods of time, sometimes years, with minimal opportunities to return home. Amy is an ER nurse. 3 months before she and I met, while her husband was home on a 6-month break, she met a local cop and started a relationship with him. We'll call him Chris. He introduced her to some pretty extreme S&M and BDSM, which she found she deeply enjoyed. Unfortunately, it rapidly escalated past anything even remotely healthy and became abusive. This rapidly began to destroy her marriage and family, and despite her husband giving her an ultimatum, she persisted. I was unaware of the abusive and obsessive nature of her relationship with Chris until Amy's husband told me. I had noticed that Amy was becoming increasingly erratic but had no explanation. I broke it off with Amy. A month later, she reached out saying she had realized how toxic the relationship was, that she had broken up with Chris, blocked him, and if I was interested, would like to start seeing me again. I verified with her husband, then started sleeping with her again. This was still very much a booty call level of relationship at this point. From that point on, over the next 8 years, we would become closer and closer and eventually marry. However, about 4 years ago, she mentioned that he had reached out to her over some pictures she posted, that they had a good conversation where he asked why she had broken it off with him and they had both reached some closure. I noted that while I was glad for her, how could he have reached her if she had blocked him? Her reply was that while she had blocked his number, she had forgotten to block him on Instagram. I let it go. A couple of years ago, in a conversation with her friend, I found out that during a medical emergency some years back, it had actually been Chris that she called to take her into the ER and stay, not this friend. I confronted Amy. She said that when she told me she had a friend take her, she just didn't think to explain who exactly. This has remained a very touchy subject for me for all the reasons stated. We are also no longer in an open relationship now that I have stopped traveling. We moved back to the area in the same town where Chris was an officer about 2 years ago. A few months ago, just before we married, she commented that I could be less touchy about Chris now that we are getting married, and after all, he had retired and moved to Florida. I asked how she knew that, and she stated that she read an article about his retirement. Because he retired as a lieutenant and the first K-9 officer, that was barely possible, but I was unconvinced and asked her point blank if she had been talking to him. She said no, point blank. A week ago, I was reading an article about Belgian Malinois and saw an article about Chris attending the retirement ceremony for his former K-9. The ceremony was only 6 months ago and would mean he was in the area until very recently, so I dug deeper. I'm good at it. Now I have all the dates, times, addresses, etc. for the man. He retired 9 months ago and left for Florida right after the K-9 ceremony, but there is no mention in any article of him moving, and there wouldn't be since he moved well after retiring. So I confronted Amy, and this time she says Chris reached out to her out of the blue via text and they chatted. When asked how that was possible if he was blocked, she said he had a new number. We had a big fight, and I've spent a couple of days considering what to do. Right now, I plan to confront her tonight. Even if it is true that she forgot to block him on Instagram, why did she have a conversation when he reached out? Even if she was confused and called him to go to the ER, why did she hide that from me for years? Even if he texted her randomly after years, after he moved to Florida using like a new number, why did she have a conversation and tell him that she now lives in town? My full intention is to ask for a divorce tonight. Am I overreacting? Edit for those who've asked for more info. Her husband and I are still close. Let's call him Dan. He is still working. The more to the story is that I had a really bad day that left me unable to keep traveling. As soon as I was home full time and more to the point laid up and not earning, my wife divorced me and tried to take the money and the kids. No need for details there, but I wound up with the kids and all the money got burned on attorneys. Amy had always been the one who had to stay home, so she and I started spending a lot of time together doing life things. Dan was glad to have someone he trusted with her and their kids, and despite me being half speed, he felt good having someone around to keep her from tangling with the too bad crowd, including Chris, which should have been a bigger red flag than it was, but I still hadn't come out of that king of the hill mentality. So the change was when I stopped traveling, Amy and I started living together, her husband Dan left permanently, I adopted her kids, and my wife divorced me, lost custody, and kept traveling. Dan doesn't have, and at this point doesn't want, a romantic relationship with anyone. I'm sure he still has a list for finding relief, but he is allergic to any sort of permanent situation. While he would never be willing to have me adopt his kids, he has given me power of attorney on their behalf, and they all call me Dad. So there's that. And yes, I'm sure there are a lot of people who judge all of us for the choices and lifestyle we've made, but we are all human, and the things required of the people called on to do the things that we do lead to a lot of compromises. We make the decisions we do based on the things we know at the moment. Hindsight is only useful when you start looking forward again. A day later, OP provided an update. First, thank you all. It seems pretty shallow, but the validation I've received from the original post really helped me externalize my feelings and gain some perspective. Also, some of you are hilarious, some are compassionate and thoughtful, and others made me appreciate that no matter how stupid I get, somebody will always find a way to outdo me. Leading with the headline, I had the conversation. I told her I am divorcing her, and it went as badly as expected. She and Chris have not been physical, but we got to the heart of the reason she has been in touch with him. I am exhausted, but feel like I have some clarity of mind and purpose that I have lacked for quite some time. I'll probably feel more chatty tomorrow, but for now, that's what I have. Edit. Here's a more coherent update now that I've slept on it. In another reply in the thread below, I shared my take on what she told me and her reasons, and I won't repeat it all. Yes, this is my opinion and what I choose to share here, and I'm sure if she were on here, she would have some reason to explain how none of it is her fault. Thinking about it, the pattern is clear. She even said as much herself, but we don't always hear what we don't want to hear. All of her relationships have come through our professional community in some capacity or another. She is attracted to the men in it and to the lifestyle. She married Dan because he's exciting and dangerous and mostly absent. She got to have the money, the kids, an exciting husband, and near total independence because he was only home maybe 3 or 4 weeks a year. Because of the circumstances, she could also sleep around freely. This was fine until Dan spent an extended period at home. There was a lot said about how unfair or unreasonable it is when one of us comes back home with zero idea of how things work or why and starts acting as if our opinion of what home life should or should not look like needs to be followed. I get that actually. Long story short, she was never interested in a normal marriage and is not now. She wants and enjoys the lifestyle she had, first with Dan and then with me. It ended with Dan when he came home and tried to play house. It ended with me when I came home long term and tried to do the same thing. For that matter, that's what ended my marriage with my first wife. Me coming home and acting like I owned the place rather than an occasional visitor. Amy did enjoy the more normal life with me, but also wants the old excitement. She wants to have her cake and eat it too. So she reached back out to Chris because she liked what they did until Chris went too far and Dan was about to leave home again. It was bonus excitement for her at the time because she got to literally watch me confront Chris at our home and send him away. But things have changed since then, and the new circumstances mean she can hook up with Chris and do much more extreme things than she does with me, while also having me at the house to keep Chris in check. The only catch is that it's no longer on the up and up, so she and Chris would have to sneak around. It almost works, but I clue in and realize they are in contact, unraveling the whole thing before they have an opportunity to act on it. Chris definitely scratches a itch that Dan and I do not. Dan and I are similar in that we can and do enjoy some level of BDSM, but as it escalates, it becomes much too similar to work things we don't want within a million miles of our homes. I'm happy to put the handcuffs on you and hold you down, but once we get to heavy impact play, cutting, or God help me CNC, the level of nope is so high it could put me off for weeks. So yeah, Chris is a better lover than I am in that regard. Alcoholism. I know my short reply last night while tired was pretty ugly. Yes, there is truth there, but no, it isn't that simple. I was quoting her, but a lot of what she said was intended to be hurtful. I appreciate the kind questions and comments. I have tried medical marijuana, but it's a terrible fit for me. It made me physically less coordinated, but also made me feel more alert. The combination takes me from a level of hypervigilance that already requires medication to flat out dangerous paranoia, so hard pass. For whatever reason, I have little reaction to local anesthetic, so it's difficult to treat the pain locally. The solution has been stronger meds like opiates, but since I don't have a death wish nor any desire to inflict a drug-addicted dad on my children, I left those behind completely at the very first opportunity. So now I take a ton of ibuprofen, lidocaine patches, biofreeze, weekly massage therapy, and yes, more nights than not, I wind up drinking at bedtime in order to get to sleep. I've gotten a lot of advice about this over the last few years and many suggestions. I don't imagine anyone here has a better idea, but please feel free to make a suggestion. I'm 100% open to anything that works without turning me into a monster. A deleted user said, "This relationship was doomed from the beginning. Why do people ignore the red flags so often? Are people so desperate, lonely, and insecure that they think they don't deserve better? Make it make sense." User nearby assignment said, "There are always those comments on monogamy turned poly posts. I think it fits here. Why would monogamy suddenly work after 8 years with OP and possibly even longer than that with the ex-husband? I also like how he says that his wife left him for the same reason as his ex-wife. It sounds to me like he was fine with sleeping around when he was gone all the time, but when he's home, he wants to change things. Last but not least, he lost custody of his kids, which were not mentioned when discussing how he and his wife both had to travel constantly. Who was with the kids then? He doesn't mention visitation or anything regarding his kids. Does he have any parental rights? I wouldn't say Amy is making a good choice, but I don't think OP is a reliable narrator.